Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Creating an Effective and Sustainable Chapter Budget for Students. I am Marlene Diaz. I'll be your moderator today, and I'm joined with Diego and Alex from Wichita State University, so I'll have them introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Escobedo. I'm the current president for Wichita State University chapter based in Kansas, Kansas. And hopefully you're enjoying your productive day here at Needle today.
Hello, Chef Familia. I'm Diego Vargas. I was the 2023-24 Chef President this past academic year, and I'm happy to be here to answer all your questions.
And
Great.
before we get started with the questions, I just want to remind you guys that we do have our on-demand session. It will be up until August the 31st. Go ahead and check it out, where we explain it to you guys how to create a sustainable chapter budget.
Thanks, Alex, for that reminder. So we're going to start off with the first question. Who from the chapter board should be involved in the preparation and the management of the budget?
So the way that we do it, our chapter is mostly the officers, which that includes the president, vice president, and the treasurer. So these three are going to be the main point of contact when it comes to creating budgets and creating a funding for the overall academic year. And we also get involved. We have a lot of talks with our advisor. So our advisor is pitched in. We keep her informed of our expenses or our future plans that we hold. And apart from that, we also have our government. So our chapter has a student government, and we keep in touch with their treasurer as well, since our funding is based on them as well. So they will be in the loophole as well. Keep them informed on our budget.
No, that's great. Another question we do have, what are some resources that you recommend for chapter leaders who are not as experienced in formulating any type of budgets?
So coming from me, as a new chapter president, one of my biggest resources that I used was the old president for my chapter. So I contacted him, and I had brief meetings with him here and there, where I would ask him questions about, hey, how did you manage to do this with this type of funding? Who did you contact to obtain these funds for this event? So I would say that for me, the biggest resource that I used was using my old chapter president. I asked him a lot of questions, but also our advisors. Our advisors are there to help the chapter, to help us, to make everything flow as smoothly as possible. So use your chapter advisors. Your chapter advisors are very knowledgeable when it comes to who you can get funding from, who you can contact, what point of contacts are going to be necessary for the academic year. But other than that, hopefully your chapter takes notes of the events that you guys do and the type of spending that you guys have done in the previous years. So take a look at those. Definitely take a look at those and look at how the previous chapters, previous presidents did their funding, allocated their money, and how detailed they were in their notes. That's what I use. I frequently have to skim back through those notes and see how the type of funding was being managed. So I would say that those would be the biggest three resources that I currently use. I don't know if Diego has any additional resources that he would like to mention when he was our chapter president.
Yeah, I think if you're starting from scratch, from have no experience, I think the biggest recommendation is just have a conversation with your advisor and really understand how money works at your school, what funding is best, when to expect it, what money can be allocated to what pools of money can be allocated where. For example, like at Wichita State, we can't use some of our funding for travel, but we could use it for hotel, etc. So I think just start knowing the rules, regulations, and stuff like that. I think that's the biggest tip I have. If you're starting from the very scratch, and I think just start developing a plan. And yeah.
Well, that was great. I have one more question for you. What are some best practices to share for any incoming chapter leaders as they're prepared to embark for chapter creation process?
I could start with that one. So I would say it's if you're not how I mentioned earlier, if you're not an officer, then still take into account try to get as much information as you can from your officers. That way, oh, this is how the funding is being managed by our officers. Just because you are, take for example, a fundraising chair or some other position from your cabinet, then try to pitch in as much as you can when it comes to your funding. Yeah.
Can you repeat the
Awesome.
question?
It sounds like we have some audience questions here, so we're going to start with those. Your first question is, what have been the biggest financial challenges you faced, and how did your chapter overcome them?
I think Diego will be able to answer this question in most detail since he did have a financial challenge when the academic year started. So Diego, would you mind?
Yeah. So I think last year I became president at the first week of April, and the old exec team left our chapter without any pretty much any money. So that was our first challenge. We were starting from the ground zero, right? So I would look for opportunities. I know in the professional chef chapters, one example I could give you is the Kansas City professional chapter hosted an event where all the professionals from Kansas City met up at Burns and Mac, and they had a huge raffle, $1,000, and they said anybody that's from an undergrad chapter, it's one ticket for the raffle. We ended up winning it. But other than that, I think that was the biggest hurdle, just start the funding process itself. So I think it just comes back to really understanding the process at your school, how it works. When can you apply? When does the money come in? Stuff like that, really understanding it. So I think one of the challenges is just getting over that first bump, so you could actually start, doing events, getting ready for nationals. Another tip I will for sure give you guys that was a financial battle was understanding that there's people at most universities that do fund orgs and really making those connections, really being really connected around school. So I know we have a few people at our school. We asked for we show why they should support our org, and they usually fund us, which I'm really grateful for. I think just start connecting around school, see if some people, some administrative people, have pools of money that they could help at chapters. I don't know if Escobedo, if you want to add anything.
No, I think because I was in the same executive board when Diego was president, so I do see a lot of the hurdles that he just mentioned.
All right, we're going to go into another question from the audience. What have been your most effective ways of securing funding from other companies and alumni? How do you keep an ongoing healthy relationship with them?
I think I could probably start. So I think the first thing is doing a sponsor packet, right? So both sides, the chapter and the company, knows what the expectations are. I think that's the biggest thing. So for example, they pay $1,000, right? And they both parties, the org and the company, know exactly what they're getting out of it. So I think we had a few issues like that. So that was our very first year doing sponsor packets. I think be very open about what expectations are. I think that's a good starting point. Escobedo, you want to continue?
Yeah, so how Diego mentioned, this last academic year was our first time doing the sponsorship packet. But yeah, we have seen that it does help the chapters when you go into full detail, and how Diego explained, make sure you make the full details of what both parties are expected to do and what type of benefits they will be getting from sponsoring you. And to follow up with the question, how do you keep an ongoing healthy relationship with them? I would just say it's don't just ask for the money and then leave them unseen, if that makes sense. Definitely keep engaging with them, send them emails, invite them to your events, ask them, hey, would you guys, for example, invite them to an event for a sponsor showcase where they can come and explain to your chapter on an event about what it means to work at their company, such company, or you can even go into more professional reality and ask them, hey, would you guys be willing to help us partner up with us and plan a resume workshop or a LinkedIn workshop, stuff like that. So yeah, definitely keep in touch with them. Don't just ask for the money and leave.
No, that's good advice from both of you guys. We have one more question on what are some fundraising events that have been the most successful? Maybe you can share any insight to them.
Yeah, okay, so I'll go ahead and start with this one. I guess for our chapter, one of the biggest fundraising events that we currently do and that we currently got our hands on was doing fundraising for sporting events. So lately that has been one of our biggest incomes when it comes to our chapter budget. So I would say if you are able to get your hands on, say for example, a baseball game and basketball game and help out the team, selling at concession stands, that's definitely a big income resource that your chapter can benefit from, as we have done. So I would say get in touch with your athletic department, go to your advisor, ask your advisor, hey, do you know any point of contact who I can come in communication with and potentially do concession stands for sporting events? Because I will say that there is a lot of money involved in there and your chapter can benefit from. So if you could get your hands on there, that would be very beneficial. Diego, do you have any fundraising events that have been successful during your presidency?
Yeah, I think that's the most successful was definitely concession stands at your sporting gaming events. So like basketball games, football games, baseball games. Definitely recommend, because I think the biggest thing is that you don't have to prep. You don't have to, it's just showing up and helping out with concessions. I think that's the biggest thing. I guess I could give a very small story. Like we tried to do like a huge food fundraiser, and it was not the most successful because we spent so much time prepping it and selling it. It was like it had a lot of manpower, and like the results were the best. So we got this great opportunity to do concessions. I think that's the biggest pool of money I think most chapters could probably benefit from. You just have to get in touch with the athletic director, or it could start with your advisor.
Oh, that was great. Now we have a question about tools. What program are you guys using that recommend to keep funding on track? And how would you best distribute those funds for an event?
Yeah, I could take this question. Let's start off with, I think we will use let's start with our treasurer, Marcos. So every fundraiser will have its own like master Excel file, like every little cost that went into it, all the profit, all the revenue, etc. Like I think that was one, but I think the biggest tool we used was Microsoft Teams, because you could, since it's on the same platform, you could obviously make an Excel, drag it into like a workspace on Teams, and I think that was super convenient. And what I did, I guess this is not really pertaining fundraising, but like I did this huge national calculator, so it's like made a big saves a lot of time when you don't have to run so many iterations. You can run it pretty quick. Like, oh, let's say we're supposed to buy this much of a product, and we just ended up buying this much. Just having like a nice like formulated Excel, I think that's the biggest tip I have. Escobedo, if you have anything to add?
No, I think you mentioned them all. Our biggest way of keeping track of our funding is through Teams, through the Excel files. So yeah, that's very good that you asking this question about how to keep track, because the worst thing that could happen is you go overspend too much or you underspend, and it just turns into a big mess. So definitely, I do recommend you guys start using your Excel files and keep track of everything. Every little detail, every little expense, whether that's 5 cents or $5, keep track of it, and keep track of your receipts as well. Whether that be physical copies of your receipts or just photos, just take photos and then upload them to Microsoft Teams. In our case, we use Microsoft Teams, and just upload them for future reference, because you never know when you might need them.
Yeah, I think just to go off of that, I think it's really good to so like the next executive team that's following, are you guys just like they have something to fall back on, like, oh, let's see what this exec team did in 2022 or something, and they have like all the receipts, how much something cost, what day, what time they ran, like the sale, etc. I think just having a good I don't know, good something good to look back on. So leaving the next executive team to something they could go, maybe they see something they can improve, maybe changing the time, the hour, the product, etc. So something like that.
That's good. Well, talking about executive board members, for your boards, who is responsible for funding and versus sponsorship?
I could take that question. For sponsorships, I took lead on that because I feel like as a in my opinion, as a president, you're like the face of the org, you know. So when you're talking to a company, right? I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's best for the president to have that initial conversation, right? Then once you have that initial conversation, I think that's when you can start bringing in your other executive team. You know, like, oh, like for next meeting, I'll bring in our treasurer, and stuff like that. So I think for the sponsorship, I would definitely recommend to start off with the president. He is the face of the org. But pass on to let him answer the second part of the question.
No, yeah, I agree with Diego. The president should be the face of the org. And when it comes to sponsorships, since this is a more professional realm, I would recommend that the president takes lead on that. And then, as Diego said, start bringing in your members, your executive team. And to follow up with the question about fundraising, so our chapter does have a fundraising chair. And they're responsible for coming up, creating ideas about potential fundraisers to do. And obviously, it's not fully all on him. The whole team is there to help him. So let's say our fundraising chair decides to do a food event, a cuisine event, or whatever. Then he'll draft up his plan, and then during one of our executive meetings, he'll come in, explain the plan, and get the budget sorted out. And then once everything is set and roll, then it's all hands on deck. The entire team is there to help prepping for the fundraiser. So yeah, that's the way our chapter does it, and it has been proven to be successful. So that's what we currently do.
No, that's great. Since we're kind of talking about tools and programs, what about some methods to use to organize? I know you said teams, but in case others don't have teams or don't have access to that, what are some other tools? And how often do you revise and review your budget?
I guess I'll start with this one. So yeah, our biggest point of contact, or where we keep detailed notes of our chapter logistics, is Teams on Excel files. And these are constantly being changed. And by constantly, I mean like 2 times a week. So that way that when we have our executive meetings every week, they're up to date. You don't want to have nothing that's out of date. We do keep track of everything, and it's constantly being changed. And one of the biggest sections that's constantly under constant change is our treasurer section. So our treasurer section always has the most detailed notes of our expenses, future costs, or our overall funding or budget for the chapter. And that's constantly being changed, whether that's because we had an expense come in from, let's say, some place, or there's this cause that we have to allocate this money to. So yeah, it's constantly being changed. So I would say definitely be organized when it comes to that, because you don't want your entire team to be confused of how the budget is being managed. So how I said earlier, definitely keep track of it. And how we do it on our chapter is through Excel files.
I think a good tip, if you guys can't get Teams, back in our day, like Shep at WSC Wichita State, we used to actually go through Google Drive. So I recommend it, and it's a free account. Anybody could start one. So honestly, it doesn't really matter what you go off of. I think it's pretty much the same tool in a way. So I do recommend to have something where it's like everybody could go onto the same, anything that can be shared at the same time or can be edited at the same time. Another tip I will give for like the constant change of funding is we will always have something that like sort of like, this is on our account, this is how much money to the dollar we have. Then we always have like a section where like, all right, this is all the money we're expecting to come in, how do we plan for that? And I think that's why it kept changing, right? So every week by week, like the funding will go into account. So I kind of have a plan for the money you do have, what to expect that's going to come in, and what your expenses for like the next general meeting, how how much should be saved for nationals, etc. So I think just having like a good flow of change, and I think the president and the treasurer should always be on the same page too. I think if you once the treasurer and the president start disconnecting on how funds should be met, I think that's when it starts really becoming challenging and more stressful too. So I think that's a good tip. Just be really connected, and yeah.
No, that's great. And since you did bring up about nationals, how early do you guys recommend planning for funding for nationals?
Yeah. So if you guys look at our pre-section video, we do talk about it a little bit in there. But I think the biggest tip, something I did during the summer, is I set up like low budget, medium budget, and high budget. And it was just like a plan of attack, because I was in my senior year when I was president. So like you're like taking your capstone, it was like becomes very stressful, right? On top of being president. So something I kind of did was have some attack for each type of budget we would get, right? So it would if we expected a certain amount of money, but it ended up being half of it, or like I already have the plan for it. Like instead of going with this hotel, we're gonna go with that hotel. Like I kind of working that. So when you have free time in the summer, that's my biggest. I think that's what took a lot of stress off of me during the semester. I already kind of pre-planned this, so I think just create like a high budget, your medium budget, your low budget, and obviously where you end up at ready for national. So to answer the question, I think summer.
No, that's great. Alex, do you have anything to add to it, or any recommendations since it's coming?
Yeah, I think how Diego said it's very, very crucial when you start as early as you can. Prices for nationals, whether that's registration, airfare, or hotels, it's already out there. So go ahead and get your hands on that information and start prepping for it. And how Diego said it, go ahead and create it like a low budget, medium budget, and a high budget. High budget meaning that like everything's covered. Low budget meaning like the worst case scenario, like you're only able to take your executive team. And medium budget is the ballpark where like most realistically you're gonna fall. So I would say that you as soon as you can get your hands on this information, then go ahead and do it. And just to remind you guys, if we don't get to your questions right now, there will be a next small group session where we can answer them. So go ahead and keep the questions coming.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I'd like to add a little bit more to that too. I think something that is very, very helpful. When I was going through NILA last year, we gave this tip to I think Virginia University, their old president, and I think the biggest tip with flights, right? Because flights are always maybe besides hotel, probably like the most expensive thing. I would start calling each airline, and like you don't have to charter the bus, but they do these big packages. Like let's say you're wanting to take 50 people, 30 or something. They could give you like a discount per seat, and but it's not really advertised or anything like that. So like your United, Southwest, etc. Every airline has it. Just gotta call and just ask them like, if we were to take or reserve 20 seats to take people from Kansas to LA, like how much would it cost? And it's always like $100, $150 cheaper. So that's something that's always helped us in the past as well. So I highly recommend that.
No, that's a good insight. Thank you for sharing that. All right, another question we had is if you had the chance to recreate the budget or its management of it, what would you change, if anything, and why?
I guess I could start with this one. So our budget structure currently, and which has been done in the previous years, it has been proven to be successful. So we do try to like keep the same flow. But when it comes to like the finances and this sort of thing, I would say the way that we request money to the Student Government Association on our university at times can be tedious. So to answer your question, this is one thing that I would change. Try to make it more friendly for students when it comes to requesting money for the academic year.
I think something that would change of the budget process. Man, that's what makes me really think. I think something that we could have done that was like could have helped out way faster was possibly, I don't know. I guess like, yeah, That's a really good question. Yeah, I think maybe opening it up outside of the officers, because I think currently we just had just pretty much like the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. I kind of know the depths of it, like the very small details. But I think for longevity, for like the next president, the president after you graduate, etc., like they had to know how to run an org, how to run the fundraisers, how to get funding, etc. So maybe keeping them more in the loop too. But I think that's the one thing I could think of right now.
No, that's great. Do you guys have any last thoughts or anything else you want to add? Reminding everyone that the slides are available on the link and the presentation if you haven't fully seen it or want to revisit.
I do have one final thought that I would like to share with you guys. So obviously money is very important, especially when it comes to running a professional org as SHIP is. And I would say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask money. Like, just talk to anybody you could talk to. Ask your advisor. The way our chapter does it is most of our funding comes from the Student Government Association. But that just doesn't stop there. We go for above and beyond. We do the sponsorship package, how we said earlier. We also talk to our offices, so on-campus offices. Definitely send out emails to them, meet with them in person, ask them if they will be able to provide you with funds for such events, for nationals or regional events, stuff like that. So definitely reach out to offices in your campus. Also talk to your dean. I think the College of Engineering will be very beneficial if you can get your hands on them and start a connection with them. Don't be afraid to talk to the dean of the college. I would say those would be the biggest ways to fundraise large pools of money when it comes to funding for nationals.
Well, thank you, Alex and Diego, for all your advice that you gave us so far. And if you have any other questions, feel free to join in the small breakout rooms that are coming up. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.